prairie here, and it's coming out of winter. We have a prairie forest ecosystem. We have 3 serviceberry trees which don't have enough roots to lift up buildings, and a few other trees that have sort of come in. And this is the forest part of the prairie forest ecosystem, and in spring you'll have understory herbs that are kind of interesting. We had Boy Scouts put in a brick pathway. These spring herbs are starting to come through, and then we'll have some shrubs and some trees. Provide a break for birds that come in out of the prairie. The prairie's over there. We have a simulated moraine here. That's where the glaciers came down from Canada with rich rock and rubble, and the stones that are here represent the rubble that's dropped by a glacier when it was cold. When it warmed up, the meltwater would go out in front. So over there we have an area that is wet. There's a buried bath in there, so the plants over there can have wet feet. In front of the moraine, you always had the water melting and dribbling out on the flat area in front of the moraine. So we have a local place called Flatville, and it's flat because it was where the glacier melted. So the edge timber trees are just coming out in bloom. You see, very shortly they'll be in bloom. Over this side is the same. We'll take a seat on our conversation on the area. People come and enjoy. Hundreds, perhaps even thousands of people have come through this little park that had 2 very big advertising signs on it, and they were too big for the city and the state and the federal highway. So they reduced them to a billboard that's at the end of this little corridor. That left the space so that it was vacant and with weeds. So we asked the owner, Dr. Youngerman, if we could put in our weeds, which are Prairie Plants. So he brought in some soil because this was originally a landfill. This was Goose Lake Pond, and there was a congregational church here or nearby, and the pond more or less got filled in, and the filling was not very good soil, so our little prairie doesn't have very good soil. But the prairie is rough and tough, and it can keep things going. We lose some of the more delicate species, but they're now facing spring with the litter from last year on them, and that's what we're looking at right now, is the plants coming through the litter. If we remove the litter, the heat and light gets in to the plant very early, and the prairie appreciates that. But the prairie has been for 6,000 years being fired, and if we don't fire it, it's got so used to being fired by lightning and later by Indians, and then now we have to do a prescribed burn, a control burn to liberate the plants in the spring. And it couldn't be at any time of the year, just simulated like lightning. But it's convenient in the spring because the small animals and birds and whatnot have not yet nested and had young ones. So we're in a downtown setting, so we can't burn the prairie, so we have to give it a haircut very shortly. These are the little plants that are starting to grow. And this one is a mint, and it is very aromatic. You screw it up and you smell it, and wow, it's a mint. And you could use this as a condiment in your cooking.
What's the name of it, Dave?
Bee balm. It's a balm for bees. When it's mature, the flower is full of pollen and nectar, and bumblebees especially just enjoy it. And you can see them feeding. This is last year's flower. And if you have a bumblebee on it, it's so intent that you can often pat its backside and it won't object. And so if you watch them fly away, their saddlebags are full of pollen, and they have nectar too, and they're so heavy laden that when they leave the flower they sometimes go down, and then they have to come up because it takes them time to take off with that weight. So here we have grapevines, and there's probably too many grapevines. They're wild grapes, and they're only about a quarter of an inch across. Well, they're a little sour, but they're very nutritious. The wildlife gets to use the grape. So here's a cup plant. Here's the stem from last year, and there's the plant growing already. So we have to remove these and get rid of them. And we're bringing some artifacts here, like the sulky wheel, because when settlers came, they were using horses. And so their elevators were just 5 miles apart. Their schools were fairly accessible because people had to walk to school or ride a horse to school. So that's just to remind people of a different history. So if you stand in that corner, you can photograph back and imagine millions of miles of prairie. The state of Illinois was 2/3 prairie, and it would look like this, so you have to close your eyes and squint and believe that this was what it looked like in spring. And there's a butterfly up there in the background.
I see.
You'll never see it. The litter we have to remove. This is big blue stem and Indian grass. In some places we have little blue stem.
Little blue stem?
Yeah, there's several grasses. They're all here, and here is it ready. It has roots underneath that are perennial, and they'll last. They'll go down perhaps at least 10 feet, and there might be a mile of rootlets on the plants that are underneath here. So we take this litter and we put it on a prairie that needs seeds. Sometimes there's a few seeds left over. If we fire a prairie, the fire helps to burst the seeds and they can germinate. So that happens to be an area where there's mainly grasses, but you'll have perhaps, in this case, about 30 species. There's strawberries growing, and you can see the litter is changing to have some more broadleaves. Settlers wanted plants that were growing early in the spring, and the prairie doesn't grow early in the spring. So if they wanted to have cattle and sheep and goats, they were going to have to bring in plants from Europe, and that were adjusted to growing early in the spring. So with them came the weeds, and I suspect that dandelions are an introduced species from Europe.
What is the bright red berry-like plant?
A rose hip. So that's a prairie rose. If you pull that, it would have a runner about 18 feet long. Right behind you here is a lead plant that is tall. If you look towards the sign, You can see a very tall lead plant. It's like 6 feet tall. Here you're getting tall plants, and you get a few milkweeds. There's a milkweed, and if you look up, there's tall coreopsis. It's a yellow bloom, and there's a rosin weed there. What it is.